They say she came crawling out of the canyon like a ghost. Midday sun above Dry Forks was hot enough to split bone, but the woman they found had no shadow left to cast. Her dress hung in ribbons, stained with blood and trail dust. One eye swollen shut, lips cracked, barefoot and limping. She stumbled into town, as if the desert had chewed her up and spit her out. No one moved to help her. Sheriff Taggart stood on the porch of the general store, chewing the same tobacco he always did, squinting into the glare. He saw her, same as everyone else, took his hat off, scratched his bald head, and turned back inside. "Ain't our business," he muttered. Mrs. Bly, the pastor's wife, clutched her parasol tighter and guided her children to the other side of the street, as if misery might be catching. Two cowboys leaned against the saloon post and snorted, nudging each other like the woman was some punchline. She collapsed in the dirt beside the well, arms shaking. Tried to pull herself upright. Failed. Someone whispered, "She's one of Marlin's." And that was that. She lay there the rest of the day, unmoving. Buzzards circled. No one came near. Not until long after sundown, when the heat bled from the ground and the sky turned bruised with stars. A single rider emerged from the Black Hills. His horse walked slow, hooves soft over the dust. The man wore no badge, no star, no colors. Just a battered hat pulled low and a rifle slung across his back. He dismounted with a grunt, tied his horse to a rail that nobody used anymore. He knelt beside the girl, hands rough and quiet, checked her breathing, her pulse. Then, without a word, he lifted her up like she weighed no more than a sack of feathers and carried her across the street. Someone called from a porch, "Hey now, what you want with her?" The man didn't answer, just kept walking. He rode out the way he came, through the brush and into the black. His name was Elijah Quinn. Folks in Dry Forks called him the Quiet Rancher. Lived alone, out beyond the canyon wall where the sun hit strange. He didn't buy much, didn't sell much, didn't speak unless you asked direct. Once a month he came to town for flour, bullets, coffee, and a bottle of liniment. Never looked anyone in the eye. They said he used to be something else, before the war. Before the scars on his forearm and the limp in his left leg. Now he was just a man with land and silence. He brought her to his ranch in the dead of night. A few goats bleated as he carried her past the corral. The house was plain, logs settled deep in the earth. He laid her on his own bed, fetched water from the pump, cleaned her wounds with salt and a torn undershirt. By morning, she opened one eye. It took a minute before she knew where she was. When she tried to rise, pain shot through her ribs and forced her down again. She flinched when the door creaked. Elijah stood in the doorway, holding a tin plate, eggs, beans, and a chunk of cornbread. He set it beside her, without speaking, and left. She ate everything but the cornbread. Later, he returned with a rag and a basin, and without a word handed her both. She nodded, washed herself, and tried to comb her fingers through the knots in her hair. That evening, she sat outside the house, wrapped in an old quilt. Chickens pecked around the yard. Elijah worked nearby, mending a gate that had blown open. He didn't glance her way, but he spoke for the first time. "You got a name?" She hesitated. "Clara." He nodded once. "You ain't bleeding no more." "I noticed." "You can stay here, long as you need." She wanted to ask why. Why he had picked her up. Why he hadn't done what every other soul in Dry Forks had done. But his back was already turned. That night, sleep came slowly. Every sound, wind through the boards, coyotes in the hills, snapped her eyes open. She dreamed of rope and gunpowder, of Brant Marlin's laugh, of the night she ran. Days passed. Clara walked with a limp, but she walked. She fed the chickens, drew water from the pump, found an old shirt of Elijah's and stitched it smaller to fit her frame. There was no mirror in the house, but one morning she caught her reflection in the water trough. Her face was unfamiliar, thinner, tougher. One evening, she caught Elijah watching her from across the yard. He said nothing. She said nothing, but the silence between them had changed. It was less hollow. By the second week, she cleared the weeds from the side of the cabin and found a bed of long-forgotten herbs, sage, yarrow mint. She knelt and wept among them without knowing why. Elijah came home with a bundle under one arm, dropped it on the porch with a grunt. Inside were new boots, small, clearly not his size, and a second-hand revolver, oiled and wrapped in canvas. "I ain't good with gifts," he said. Clara looked at the boots, then at him. "You think I need a gun? I think you should decide that yourself." She turned the revolver over in her hands. "I was a schoolteacher once." "That's so. In Kansas. Before the war. Before everything." Elijah didn't ask what everything meant. He only nodded, the way men do when pain needs no explaining. She tried the boots the next morning. They fit. Elijah was mending fence posts by the North Ridge when she came to him with a question. "You ever shoot anyone?" His hand stilled. "I did once." "Was it worth it?" He looked out across the hills, where the canyon rose like a broken tooth. "Depends who's asking." Clara didn't speak again, but she stayed beside him as he worked, passing nails, holding planks. When the sun dipped below the ridge, they stood in the silence together. The wind rose. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled. Clara shivered. Elijah looked at her then, really looked. Not as someone broken, not as a stray, but as someone standing. He cleared his throat. "Weather's changing." She nodded. "So am I." Neither said anything else. But the quiet, that deep, canyon silence, felt different now. Like something was waiting to be named. Like a breath drawn before the first shot rings out. The wind shifted one morning, carrying with it more than dust. Clara stood by the clothesline, hands red from washing, when the horse tracks appeared, deep fresh, unshod hooves gouged into the soft earth leading up to the ridge. She froze mid-step. Elijah knelt to examine the prints, jaw tight. "Two riders. Came close enough to look," he said. "Didn't cross the fence." "Scouts?" Clara asked. He nodded once, grim. "Could be Marlin's boys." She hadn't spoken that name aloud since she'd arrived. Brant Marlin, the man with gold teeth and dead eyes. The man who'd burned her schoolhouse, claimed her like she was spoils of war, then laughed when she bled. She had run one night, while the gang slept off a raid, barefoot with nothing but fear in her lungs. It had taken her 2 days to crawl to Dry Forks. And even now, she still dreamed of his belt buckle flashing in firelight, his voice in her ear like poison. The silence between her and Elijah deepened. She followed him back to the cabin, where he unhooked the canvas-wrapped rifle from a wall and began to clean it on the table. "How far would they track me?" she asked quietly. "As far as you let them." A week passed. The air turned colder. Each morning Clara scanned the hills with Elijah's old spyglass. The chickens grew restless, sensing things before humans did. One night, the dog barked at nothing, and Elijah sat up straight in bed, listening. Then word came from Dry Forks. A rider passed through, pale as chalk, saying Marlin's gang had been seen at Devil's Cross, 15 miles out and closing. Sheriff Taggart claimed it was just rumor, but even he kept his shotgun close now. Clara watched the road after that, her hand resting on the revolver Elijah had given her. Her palms no longer trembled when she gripped it. Over black coffee one morning, Elijah spoke. "You ever use one of those?" "Never had to." "You might have to now." He led her into the canyon, where rocks rose like broken ribs, and the wind howled through narrow passes. They stood 10 paces apart. Elijah set up bottles on a fence rail. "Hold your breath," he said. "Squeeze. Don't pull." She missed the first 5, clipped the 6th. By the end of the day, she hit 3 out of 10. "You've got the spine for it," he told her. "I'd rather never use it." "That makes you better than most." That night, Clara sat by the fire, turning the revolver over in her hands like a prayer bead. Elijah sat nearby, carving a piece of pine. She glanced at the lines in his face, the wear in his knuckles. "Why did you leave town?" she asked suddenly. He didn't answer at first. Then, "I got tired of watching people die and not being able to stop it." "You were a lawman?" He shook his head. "Something uglier. I hunted men for money. Real bad men, most of them. But not always. After a while, you stop caring which side of the line they stand on. You just shoot." Clara stared at the fire. "And now, I fix fences, feed goats. They sat in silence a long while. "Marlin won't stop," she said at last. "Not until he's made an example of me. He'll find it harder than he expects." The next morning, they found another sign, this time a cigarette stub, still warm, under the cottonwood tree near the west fence. Elijah tracked the hoofprints again. 3 horses now. He came back with a hard look in his eyes. "We're not waiting anymore." They fortified the ranch. Clara helped drag logs to reinforce the barn doors. They hid supplies in the root cellar. Elijah showed her where he kept his extra ammunition, the rifles buried in the hayloft, the trapdoor under the porch. She asked, "You always prepare like this?" He said, "Only when I mean to survive." 2 nights later, they heard the whistle, high, almost bird-like, then the soft thud of hooves in the dark. Elijah didn't move. He sat at the table, revolver beside his hand. Clara stayed low by the back window. "Just watching us," Elijah murmured. "Getting familiar." The moon was sharp and silver. Shadows shifted. Someone laughed, thin and ugly, from beyond the tree-line. Clara's stomach turned. That laugh belonged to Darby Snipe, one of Marlin's worst. She remembered his eyes, glassy and dull, his hands always too curious. "They'll come soon," she said. "They're not patient men." Elijah didn't answer, but his jaw was set like stone. The next day, he took Clara farther into the canyon, showed her the ridgeline where he planned to make his stand. Natural choke point, steep drop on one side, a blind curve on the other. The place smelled of sage and old bones. "If they come in force, we hit them here, then fall back to the ranch. And if they split up," he looked at her, "then we pray they're stupider than they look." That night, she found herself staring at the sky. Stars bright as frost. She remembered teaching her students the names of constellations, their little fingers, tracing them in the dirt. Now those same stars hung over her like distant, uncaring gods. "Elijah," she said softly. He was sitting on the porch, sharpening a knife. "If they kill you, I don't want to be taken alive." His hand stilled. "That won't happen." "You don't know that." He looked up, eyes meeting hers. "I know this. I've got no family left. No one waiting on me. But you still have something. Even if it's just the will to live. Marlin takes that from people." Elijah rose. His boots crunched over the porch boards. He stood in front of her, not touching, just near enough to feel like a promise. "He didn't take it from you. You made it here. You're standing. That means something." Clara blinked hard. "You believe that?" "I've seen what's left of people who don't fight. You're not them." The wind picked up. In the distance, coyotes yipped. The night felt full of things that had yet to happen. Elijah turned toward the canyon. "They'll ride in before the week's end." Clara nodded. "Then we'll be ready." And somewhere out there, beyond the ridges and the brush and the edge of law, trouble rode on horseback, coming fast and sure and without mercy. Dawn cracked red against the canyon walls, bleeding over stone like the warning of an old god. Elijah and Clara stood at the edge of the ravine, backs hunched under wool coats, watching the narrow trail that wound through the rocks below. The chill wasn't from the wind. He had positioned her behind a fallen log overlooking the main bend, her rifle balanced, extra rounds tucked beside her in a saddlebag. "You don't shoot unless they pass the white rock," he said. "That's the line. If they cross it, we stop being prey." Elijah moved down to the low shelf below, cloaked in scrub and dust, hidden where the light couldn't touch. He didn't speak again. His focus was a blade's edge. They waited. Clara's breath caught at the first sound. Iron shoes on loose shale, muffled curses in the wind. She shifted, trying not to make a sound. Her fingers tightened on the rifle. Then the men came. 3 at first. Darby Snipe among them. His yellow hat easy to spot. Behind him rode 2 more, all of them filthy, grinning, sure of themselves. They came slow, like wolves sniffing out the trail. Brant Marlin wasn't with them. Clara knew he wouldn't show his face till the blood stopped flowing. He liked to walk through the ruin after. Darby stopped right at the white rock. He lit a cigarette. "Ain't no one hiding here," he said, flicking ash. Elijah stepped into view behind them, calm as death. "You're too loud for ghosts," he said. The outlaw spun. Darby dropped his cigarette, eyes wide. Elijah fired once. The shot cracked through the canyon. Darby dropped without a sound, spine shattered. One of the others managed to raise a gun before Clara put a bullet through his shoulder. He screamed and fell sideways off his horse. Then the canyon exploded with noise. More riders, 5, 6, maybe more, thundered from the ridge. Clara fired again, clipped one man off his saddle, then ducked as bullets whined overhead. Elijah rolled behind a boulder and returned fire. His shots deliberate, surgical. Clara saw 2 more fall, but the rest scattered, circling like buzzards. One tried to climb the canyon wall to flank Elijah. Clara tracked him, held her breath, squeezed the trigger. His body rolled back down the slope, lifeless. The fight stretched minutes into what felt like hours. Dust thickened the air. Clara's shoulder ached from recoil. Elijah's rifle clicked empty. He drew his revolver and kept firing. Then silence. Just wind and the cries of wounded men. Of the 10 who rode in, only 2 crawled away. Elijah let them. Blood had soaked the dirt enough for one day. Clara slid down the slope, heart hammering. She found Elijah sitting on a rock, panting, his sleeve torn and dark with blood. "You're hit," she said. "Just grazed." She ripped fabric from her skirt, pressed it to the wound. He winced but didn't move. "You held your line. That was good." Clara looked back at the canyon, scattered bodies half buried in the dust. Her hands trembled now, in the quiet. "It's not over." "No, but we sent a message." They buried the dead in a shallow grave and burned the rest. No time for sermons. The canyon didn't want prayers, only memories. As smoke climbed into the sky, Elijah placed a flat stone atop the mound. No names, just the act of remembering. They rode back slow. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows that reached for their horses' legs. Clara's stomach turned over with dread. The battle was a warning, not the war. That night, Elijah cleaned his wound by lamplight. Clara sat across from him, silent, wrung out. She had killed 3 men. "They made their choice," he said. "I still see their faces." He nodded. "You'll carry that, but it won't weigh the same forever." She didn't answer. The next morning, a note was found nailed to the barn door. The paper was torn, smeared with blood. A single sentence. "You should have stayed, lost girl. I'm coming to marry you proper." No name, but none was needed. Clara tore it down with shaking fingers. "Elijah," she said, voice brittle. "He's close. Real close." He stepped beside her, reading the message, his jaw tightening. "Then we meet him on our terms. At the place he can't twist." "The canyon?" she asked. "No," he said. "Here. Home." Clara looked at the worn porch boards, the tired fence, the coop where the hens now clucked uneasily. The ranch felt small under the weight of what was coming, but she was no longer the girl who had crawled through cactus and riverbed to escape. She looked up, eyes hardening. "Then we don't run." Elijah met her gaze. "No, we make our stand.